Hey everybody, normally I don't do intros on these list videos, but for this one it's kinda necessary. Over the last 3 years I've said a lot of things in these videos, a lot of which I agree with, and some things I don't anymore. And occasionally I'll get quite a bit of backlash. So today I thought it would be fun to go through some of my most controversial placements. I'll play a clip from each video and we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards. I'll leave timestamps in the description if you want to skip around, but first...
The new year is here, and with it comes the perfect time to start fresh, build better habits, and work on yourself. If you're looking for a simple, enjoyable way to make a positive change, let me introduce you to Fume, the flavored air device that is all about creating better habits. Fume isn't a vape, it's a device that draws natural, non-toxic flavors to your mouth. No nicotine, no vapor, no batteries, just pure flavored air. It's a great way to satisfy your oral fixation with non-toxic flavors, free from nicotine or vapor. You can even use it at your dear old Bobo's house without him finding out. He doesn't need to know. It can be our little secret. In all seriousness, I love this product. They sent me one a few months ago, and outside of the 2 weeks I had the flu, I think I've used it every single day since then. This has been a permanent fixture on my desk. It has been my go-to fidget toy if I'm editing or writing a script. It's got this really nice, like, ratchet sound. I don't know what you call that, but it's awesome, dude. And if you get the stand, you can just go nuts. Check this out. Oh. There we go. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Love that. This is a super positive product and I can't recommend it enough. If you're looking for recommendations, the crisp mint flavor is my favorite. It has a little bit of a kick and lasts the longest from the ones I've tried. Try Fume today, and if you order the Journey Pack now using my code DisputedOrigin, you'll get a free Fume topper, an awesome accessory to level up your experience. Go to tryfume.com/disputedorigin or scan the QR code on screen. Great sponsor, now back to the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, the worst lunar, scratch that, the worst item in the game, coming in at the #1 spot, Flux Pauldron. Double your health, but have your speed. This item makes Light Flux look good. When it comes to defense items, we have 3 categories. Healing lets you recover from damage taken, damage reduction lets you reduce the amount of damage taken, and mobility, which lets you avoid damage altogether. Mobility is by far the best of these. It's one of the first things to look out for in any run, and if you don't find any, you're going to end up taking a lot of hits that you could have otherwise avoided. For the hits you will inevitably take, damage reduction is next. You know what's a lot more effective than doubling your health bar? Having the amount of damage you take with 1 opal. Repulsion Armor will protect you from small hits, and Rose Buckler will slash the total amount of damage you take. When you fill your build up with mobility and damage reduction, you'll find you don't really need much healing. You will need some, but generally a few slugs will get the job done. The worst way to deal with damage is increasing your health bar. Bison Steak is a meme for a reason, guys. At the end of the day, there are so many better options. Flux creates 5 new problems for every one it fixes. What good is a double-sized health bar when you're going to be taking 5 times more damage from the lack of mobility? Mobility items are also half as effective. It will take approximately 7 goat hooves just to get back to base speed, and base speed is already slow as it is. The benefit of this lunar ends up being inconsequential most of the time, and the drawback is by far the worst of any lunar in the game. Flux, more like stone. Go away. Nailed it. I have consistently rated Flux as the worst item in the game. The clip you just saw is from the worst Lunars video, but I ranked it as the worst item in the game overall as well, which is a big claim. This is a sentiment I still largely agree with, although some of those pre-rework Seekers items did give it a run for its money. If I made that worst items video 2 months ago, half of them would be from Seekers, but Flux would still probably be #1. That's just for general runs though, and one thing I wish I mentioned is that this item on loop gets substantially better. If you get to the point that you have too much movement speed, as often happens when looping, this is a quick and dirty way to lower it. In my opinion, you'd still be better off scrapping and investing your speed items into something else. That's just to say, it does have some use, but yeah, overall, I think it's still a very, very stinky item. But excluding all of those, I think the worst equipment in the game is Radar Scanner. Reveal all interactables for 10 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. I don't care what Markiplier says, this thing sucks ass. I guess it does speed up your game slightly, but you can get basically the same effect by using your eyeballs. I'd like it more if it had more icons, but it reuses the same icon over and over and over. So for example, chests, equipment barrels, radio scanners, 3D printers, fans, the broken wrecks and abyssal depths, scavenger sack, void cradles, and void potentials are all marked with the chest icon. Even in the niche cases where you'd want it, it does a shitty job of giving you information. Feels like they got kind of lazy with this one. If everything had a different icon, this would actually be really good and useful for speedruns, but as it is, it just doesn't tell you that much, and having a 45-second cooldown on top of that just makes it even worse. Unless you're looping and just want to save a little bit of time looting, I don't really know why you'd want this. Even if you are looping, there's so many better alternatives, like a card or a recycler, and for that reason, this equipment is the worst in the game. This is a tricky one, and I don't fully agree with it anymore. I think Radar Scanner can be a decent equipment for a certain type of player. That is not me. I mentioned Markiplier in the clip because there's an old video where he loops his run a bunch and uses radar to quickly find items. This is the best use case for the item. You'll get more value out of basically any other equipment, but sometimes if your run is strong enough, you don't need a good equipment. This happens a lot in loop runs, and while the min-maxer in me wants to take a card or recycler so bad, the truth is you don't always need them. You can get through the stages just fine with a radar scanner. This is pretty much never the case within the first 5 stages though, and I think it is the worst equipment if all you're doing is going straight to Mithrix. One thing I want to note, the Devotion update actually unintentionally made this equipment worse. Chests don't even have their own icon anymore, and they're instead replaced with a generic loot icon. Thanks, Gearbox. At number 3, Void Locust. Here's a map you don't see me talking about very often, because this map is disabled in Eclipse. Why, Hopu? Why would you do this? This is legitimately my favorite map in the whole game, and I can't even play it in my preferred difficulty. First of all, it looks beautiful. The atmosphere of this map is top-notch, with the whales in the background and the black hole in the distance, the purple portals and the slipstream that moves you across the entire map, although these could probably move you a little bit faster. The only enemies here are void enemies, and I guess sometimes you can get lunar family events. I didn't even know that because I can't play the map. The map serves as the predecessor to the Voidling fight, similar to how Commencement had the bottom portion with pillars before Mithrix. This is basically the same thing, but it's just its own stage. You can get here by doing void fields or going through the purple portal after stage 7. This map doesn't have normal chests, it does have void cradles though, and it does have its own version of pillars. But to be fair, I do think this map had the best implementation of the pillars concept because it actually punishes you for leaving the zone. Teleporters in the rest of the game are just more of a suggestion. You can stay in them if you want, but it's not necessary. The way Vocus does it is a lot more engaging. I will never understand why they didn't just make this an alternate to stage 5. All they would have needed to do is make a few changes and it would have been phenomenal. But as it is now, I never get to play it. I was gonna put this at number 1, that's how much I love this map. But maybe that's just because I haven't played it as much. My best stages video came out exactly a year ago and it has already aged like milk. In that time, we got 6 new mainline maps, 9 if you include the variants of Shattered Abodes, Treeborn Colony, and Verdant Falls, and a lot of the enemy pools on regular maps have changed too. Many of the new maps probably would have made it on there, but I stand by Void Locust as one of the best maps in the game. Loading into that map for the first time on launch is one of my favorite experiences I've had with the game. It's not a popular pick, it's barely even a pick to be honest, but damn it, it's one of the best maps we ever got. The number 1 void item, and possibly best item in the entire game, is Encrusted Key. This is the corrupted rusted key, and instead of getting a free big chest on the next stage, you get a void potential where you choose between 3 different items. The game says the chances of seeing any given rarity is 60% white, 30% green, and 10% red. But the wiki says that's wrong and is instead 42% white, 42% green, and 17% red. But the wiki is also wrong sometimes, so I don't friggin' know anymore. Future Gramps here. So it turns out everybody's wrong. I think I've cracked the case on this one. The wiki was half right by having the white and green items be the same rarity because they are weighted the same in the code. White items have a weight of 5, green items have a weight of 5, and red items have a weight of 2. However, the wiki failed to factor in that different tiers of items have different quantities. So if you multiply the weight by the number of items available in that tier, you get 25, 30, and 4. Dividing each of these by the total weight, you get roughly 42% white, 51% green, and 7% red. One of my friends did an in-game test with 200 lockboxes, and these numbers are almost exactly correct. So yeah, as it turns out, green void items are more common than white in the void potentials. This doesn't really change my opinion on this item, but it is really interesting. Encrusted Key is basically just Artifact of Command for void items. There's only 14 of them, and one of them can't even appear here, so you have a very good chance of getting what you want when you use this item. If you find this item early on, you can get potentially 4 void items just from your first loop. And that scenario isn't that far-fetched, since Rusted Key is a common item, and you'll most likely be finding a bunch of them. Sometimes you do open duds where there's nothing you want, but again, that's rare because you get the option between 3 different items. Usually there's going to be something in there you want. Pro tip when using this item, make sure you always have 2 in your inventory when you open them, because it will go away when you use your last one. Be patient with it. If you can't find another key that stage, just wait, the lockbox will spawn on the next stage and you won't be missing out on any items. As much as I think Safer Spaces is an incredibly busted item, I can't overlook the potential of Encrusted Key. Void Key was definitely an unorthodox pick for best Void item. Voids are crazy and there's a lot of contenders for sure, and I remember having a really hard time deciding what number 1 should be. The points I make are valid, but if I made this list today, I think I would probably put Safer Spaces at number 1. It's a great item, but I think I hyped it up a bit too much. There are quite a few situations where Key just doesn't end up being helpful, either because the items presented to you are bad, or you find a bunch of keys late game and you can't use them unless you loop your run. Whereas Spaces is pretty much always useful. Key would be a close number 2 though, so I think I still largely agree with this. This was a tough list in general, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Number 9, Prayer Beads. Grows in power by absorbing experience, storing 20% of player stats per item level up. On removal, gain all stored stats. Ah yes, the proverbial stats. Very descriptive and clear. To be honest, I still don't fully understand how it works. It's like it was designed to be the most confusing item of all time. There's a whole manifesto on the wiki about it that honestly just makes it more confusing, but I'm gonna try my best to explain it. It gets a little messy, so bear with me. Essentially, when you level up, the game increases 3 stats: maximum health, health regeneration, and base damage. When you have prayer beads in your inventory, you'll see a little bead buff above your health bar, and as you gain experience, you'll start to gain stacks of this bead buff. Each stack of the buff is worth 20% of a level up, so theoretically, if you have 5 stacks of this buff, it's equivalent to a free level up. Each additional stack of this item stores 5% more of a level for each buff. So 2 stacks of this item is 25% of a level up per buff, 3 stacks is 30, and so on. Now, you don't actually get that benefit until you remove the item from your inventory via scrappers, printers, phase 4, etc. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But surprise, this item is bugged and it's about to get even more confusing. The formula for stat payouts is this: 20% plus 5% times the number of stacks you have minus 1. So if you had 1 stack, it would be 20% plus 5% times 0. 5% times 0 is just 0, so we're left with 20%, which is correct for a single stack. However, due to a bug, the game only checks how many stacks of the item you have after it's been removed from your inventory. So the correct formula for 1 stack is 20% plus 5% times -1, which is simplified to 20% minus 5%, or just 15%. So this means you would need 7 stacks of the buff to equal a level up instead of 5. But it gets even worse. Because of the game only checking the amount of stacks you have after it's already been removed from your inventory, this means scrappers will completely cripple stat payouts. Scrappers remove items in sets of 10, so if you have less than 11 prayer beads in your inventory, the game will still read it as 0 stacks of the item when you scrap. Other methods of item removal can get around this somewhat, using soups or printers, but that requires gambling, and is probably not worth it. Scrapping is the primary way of getting rid of items, and it sucks it does not work in the way it's supposed to. On paper, this effect isn't horrible, even with it being 15% instead of 20, and I have to give it a little bit of credit. The idea of having to get rid of an item in order to get the effect is unique, but it clearly was not executed very well. I really hate this item. It's so needlessly confusing. They could have just made it so that level ups give 20% more stats or something. It would essentially be the same effect, but instead they decided to give this item its own weird level up mechanic that's tied to XP but separate from player level. Additionally, we already have Beads of Fealty. Did we really need another bead item that's essentially the exact same design? It just feels a little uninspired from a design standpoint. Far from the worst item in the DLC, but it's definitely the most confusing. Prayer bead printers are really good and can make you really strong if you farm a stage for a while. Realistically, I would probably switch this with Luminous Shot and put it at number 10, but I didn't want to instantly ass blast you guys with equations at the start of the video, so it's at number 9. Ah, finally, one of the more recent ones. Okay. Both the weakest/strongest items videos were kind of a mess. These were by far the hardest ones I've ever had to do. First of all, there were only 17 items, and even including the equipment alongside its consumed variant only brings me to 19 out of 20 needed for 2 top 10s. We did end up reaching 10 on both lists, more on that later, but I say this because I didn't really have a lot of control over this one. Another thing that was really challenging was ranking items within the same tier. It's something I've always tried to avoid in the past because different tiers generally do different things and they don't have the same value. Is one resonance disc better than one goat hoof? Well, yeah, but that's not really how the game works. White items are intentionally weak, so you're incentivized to stack them, whereas reds usually have a good initial effect, but don't benefit as much from stacking. Tier lists are already extremely flawed to begin with, as everything is situational, but ranking 3 different tiers of items along with 1 lunar and 2 equipment just didn't result in a satisfying list. This is why I'm hesitant on doing one for the reworks. I will figure out a better method when that does eventually come out, but I'm still waiting to see if there's any item balance changes before I do. I just want to make sure I don't make an outdated list again. With prayer beads themselves, the bug has been patched and they get full value from scrappers now. I don't think this item should have been in the worst items list to begin with. It really didn't get reworked aside from bug fixes and a new scrapping animation. It's an amazing item and it kind of always has been. I definitely regret putting this item where I did.
Coming in at the number 5 spot, Sentient Meat Hook. 20% chance to fire homing hooks on up to 10 enemies, dealing 100% total damage. This is my personal favorite item in the game. It's like a ukulele, but on steroids. This is some of the best damage in the entire game. Obviously, it's really good at creating proc chains, but it has a lot of cool combos aside from that. One of my favorites is with Will-O-Wisp. The meat hook will pull enemies right into an explosion, and then the explosion has a proc coefficient, so it can also chain hooks off of that. That's super useful on Mithrix, but it's one of the best items for just getting you through the stages.
This is the oldest video on the list, and I think it shows. A lot of my picks were very questionable. As much as I love this item, in no world do I think Sentient Meat Hook is a top 5 red. Probably not even top 10. It's basically ukulele. A buffed up one, but still a ukulele. Nice during the mid to late game, but it's not going to do anything for Mithrix. I also put Dios at 4, which might even be worse. Yeah, super disagree with both of those.
Number 2, Singularity Band, or Void Band. As much as it pains me to say, Void Band is the second worst item in the game. Where most Void items are straight up upgrades or have roughly equal trade-off, Void Band stands out as the sole item that is a significant downgrade from its non-Void counterpart. To understand why this item is so bad, let's look at what makes the non-Void counterpart so good. Kaijaro and Runald bands are some of the strongest and most consistent items in the game. Kaijaro multiplies the attack that procced it by 3 times, creating a firestorm, damaging anything that comes in contact with it. Ice Band is similar with a 2.5 damage multiplier, but instead of being applied over time, it's applied instantly, allowing it to be used with crowbars and focus crystals. Both these items proc at the same time and share the same 10-second cooldown. They also stack incredibly well, with each additional stack being just as useful as the previous. So what does Void Band do? Well, it turns the normal bands into poopy caca. Granted, the effect looks really cool. It's a black hole that sucks everything in. The problem here is it doesn't deal any damage. You go from a 2.5 multiplier and a 3 times multiplier to a 1 time multiplier, or no multiplier at all. Additional stacks do increase this, but not nearly as much as they would with a regular band. Now, you'd assume this item would have a shorter cooldown to compensate for this, right? Well, no, it actually has a longer cooldown from 10 seconds to 20 seconds. So not only are you losing 2/3 of your damage, but you can also only use it half as much. It does have a large area of effect, but I take the smaller, higher damage area of effect from Kaijaro any day. But that's okay because it does have a proc coefficient, so you can proc a weak-ass ATG off your weak-ass Void Band. Let's fucking go, baby. But yeah, this item really only hurts you. On paper, the effect isn't horrible, but since it's at the cost of 2 of the best items in the game, it's almost never worth it. I've talked about Void Band a few times. I ranked it last in the Void items video, but its placement as second worst in the game is a little crazy to me in hindsight. There are times that regular bands aren't that amazing, and while they're pretty much always better, if you have a build that doesn't revolve around bands, as you often do, this isn't the worst pickup in the world. Speedruns and gauntlet racing has really changed my perspective on this item. On its own, it's decent AoE, especially in the mid game. Still outclassed by normal bands, don't get me wrong, but if you don't have any AoE and you're desperate for something now and not later, it's really not a bad option. But my actual number 1 pick has got to be Blight. If you've seen my best skills video, you know I put Poison at number 1, so having it here is only fitting. Blight is Acrid's alternate passive. It applies a debuff that deals 60% base damage a second, and unlike Poison, this debuff can be stacked. Now there's a number of issues with this ability, the first one being duration. Poison lasts for 10 seconds, and Blight only lasts for 5. Stacking Blight does not reset the duration, which is crucial. Bleed, for example, has infinite damage potential because each time you stack it, the duration resets. With Blight, there's a soft cap on how many stacks you can get. You are limited by your ability's cooldown. Realistically, you're not going to be getting more than 2 or 3 stacks, and even maintaining that much is a lot of work. Epidemic is the best tool for applying Blight to multiple enemies, but it has a 10-second cooldown, double the duration of Blight. So if you want to stack a lot of Blight, you either have to focus fire on one enemy, or get an insane amount of cooldown reduction items, stuff like Purities, Lysate Cells, and Alien Heads.
Cap made an excellent video comparing Blight to Poison, which you should watch, but to kind of summarize, Poison is better than Blight in the vast majority of situations. Blight is most effective early in the run and drops off heavily as you complete stages, where Poison is consistently strong. In order for Blight to even compete with Poison, you need a shit ton of cooldown reduction items, and even then, Poison is usually better. Poison is passive, you can spit and forget, but with Blight, you need to be constantly attacking to see any damage whatsoever. Poison, Accurate is one of the best survivors in the game. With Blight, he's arguably the worst.
Blight.
I don't know how many people remember this, but a few years ago, Blight had quite the controversy on YouTube. I don't think I've ever talked about this, but I think enough time has passed that I'm okay. Around the time Survivors of the Void came out, there was a small channel that did a video on Blight where their thesis was Blight is comparable to Poison and is unfairly hated. There were a lot of problems with this video. He used very cherry-picked data to support his point, and many of the tests done weren't really applicable. For example, I remember one where he was testing it with both the player and enemy level at 20, when in reality, enemies are usually scaled much higher than your own level, so it made it seem like Blight was doing a lot more than it actually would be. A lot of people were misled by this, and it ended up catching the attention of a much larger creator, who then called them privately on Discord to see if they could make a correction. It stayed unresolved, and the phone call ended up leaking. This larger creator then made a response to the Blight video, but instead of calling out their data, it was more of a criticism of the YouTuber's decisions and their character. This led to a lot of backlash, and that video was taken down. Meanwhile, the original Blight video was taken down as well, so there's not a lot of evidence of this. I say this to provide context for why I think this got so much backlash. I still think it's the worst ability, but again, Gauntlet Racing has taught me that you can win consistently with it. I highly recommend Cap's video on it if you want to see actual data on why it's bad. At the number 1 spot, we have Longstanding Solitude. On level up, gain a free unlock for the next purchase, but all gold is converted to experience. Anything that costs gold is increased by 100%. So, first of all, this item's effect just doesn't make any sense. It takes away your ability to make money, but then makes everything cost twice as much. Why? What's even the point of doing that? Chest prices are irrelevant once you pick this item up. You literally cannot collect gold, so why make chests cost more? My best guess is they did this to balance it for multiplayer, but in reality, I think this is mainly just a way you control your friends. When you pick this item up, they receive the negative effect instead of you, which is a little absurd. Well, that's not exactly true. This item is extremely detrimental to your run. While one item per level might not sound bad, if you know anything about how leveling works in the game, you can see why that's a bad idea. Leveling in Risk of Rain 2 works logarithmically. It's based off this function. Without getting into the weeds too much, it's essentially saying each level up requires significantly more XP than the last. So, to put it in perspective, to get to level 10, you need 1,840 XP. Not too bad. To get to level 20, you need 150,000 XP. Pretty big jump, right? To get to level 30, you need 12 million XP. This is usually where it soft caps. Most of my runs, I'm somewhere between level 20 and 30. But if you loop, you can keep going. You'll need 960 million XP to get to level 40, and you'll need 77 billion XP to get to level 50. See the problem? Even if we take into account the extra XP you'll be getting from converting all your gold into experience, it's not going to take you very far. Even if it doubled your XP, you'd be capping out around the same point anyway. This is really only going to give you 2 or 3 extra levels a run, and that's assuming you get it on stage 1. If you get it later or decide to loop, it's going to be even less effective. Not to mention, leveling is a pretty irrelevant mechanic in the game anyway. Your level doesn't matter half as much as items do. The only stats leveling increases is max health, health regeneration, and base damage, all of which you can get from items and more. When you pick up this item, you're missing out on 2/3 of the loot each stage, and I think that's being generous, especially in the later stages. There's just no situation where I think this item is remotely useful. It could be interesting in multiplayer, but the fact it makes everything cost double just screws over your teammates heavily. In terms of bad items, I really didn't think anything would ever be able to top Flux Pauldron, but this one definitely gives it a run for its money.
And at number 4, Longstanding Solitude. On level up, gain a free unlock for the next purchase, but all gold is converted into experience. Anything that costs gold is increased by 100%. If you saw my worst items in the expansion video, you would know I put this item as the worst item in the expansion.
I was wrong about this. I made a correction a few days ago. If you didn't see that video, here's a rundown. I thought this item was bad because level ups in Risk of Rain 2 happen very slowly at a certain point. You need 18 quintillion, 500 quadrillion XP to reach level cap, which is pretty much impossible under normal circumstances, and in a regular run, you don't get very far past level 40. While this is true, what I didn't understand is that this item completely changes the fundamentals of the level up system, making each level require the same amount of XP regardless of how high it is. Going from level 1 to level 2 is just as easy as going from level 93 to level 94. This item makes reaching level cap possible even within the first loop, which is pretty insane. This lets you deal about 3 times as much damage and have 3 times as much HP. It does come at the cost of items depending on when you get it. If you get it in the early game, it can make your run harder for a while, especially if the loot you're getting isn't the best. I would go as far as to say having some economy items is pretty essential if you want this item to work well. Those items being Roll of Pennies, Gore's Tome, and Brittle Crown. If you have any of those items, this is easily one of the best pickups. If not, it's a little more iffy. I think this item has more potential than the next 2 items on the list, but I also think it's a bigger risk and isn't as universally good, so that's why it landed at number 4.
You knew this was coming. The only time I've ever issued a correction for an item placement. I already talked about why I didn't like how these videos turned out. This was just another reason. I'm not even really happy with its placement in the best items from Seeker's video either. I think it's probably too high. This item does not get you far unless you have economy items, and not really much has changed since the rework. You don't lose purchases between stages now, but other than that, it's the same. But moving on to my most controversial opinion. Number 4, Flamethrower. Oh boy, this is going to piss some people off. Flamethrower is Artificer's default special. It deals 2000% damage, which is technically correct, but that number is also bullshit. This is calculated because it's 22 ticks of 95% base damage, so when you add it together, it's 2000%. But don't let that mislead you into thinking this ability will do damage, because it won't. I think the gameplay speaks for itself here. It baffles me that this ability is as popular as it is. And just to kind of demonstrate this, if you go on the Risk of Rain 2 wiki, the Flamethrower stuff is ridiculous. They hype it up so much and make it sound like it's the second coming of Christ. Like, check this out. Flamethrower is Artificer's main source of damage and proc effects, piercing through groups of enemies and rapidly applying on-hit effects like the Tri-Tip Dagger. Oh boy, if you're playing Artificer, one of the strongest survivors in the game, and Flamethrower is your main source of damage, you're doing something horribly wrong. Also, Artificer is cooldown based. Generally not a good idea to go into bleed. Yes, you can get some stacks with Flamethrower, but since the attack is close range, you'll have a very hard time maintaining that. They also wrote, Flamethrower deals colossal damage and procs many times against multiple enemies, while Ion Surge allows Artificer to stay above the action and out of the way of danger. Experiment with both to determine which option is more appealing. Colossal damage? It can't even kill a golem on stage 4. What do you mean? They also keep referencing the fact that it hits multiple enemies. It has a 21 meter range. It hits the enemy directly in front of you and not much else. And just in case that last quote convinced you to take Ion Surge, right below this they wrote, losing Flamethrower will forfeit a huge portion of Artificer's damage and almost all of her procs. Backup magazines and skillful use of Snap Freeze will become even more necessary than usual to recover some of the lost damage. Gathering items with on-kill effects such as Gasoline and Will-O-Wisp also helps. Okay, now the stuff about Gasoline and Wisp is true on everybody. This is in no way related to Flamethrower. Flamethrower doesn't have a large area of effect. I don't know why they're acting like it does. And the stuff about Artificer losing her procs just doesn't make any sense. Not every proc is created equal. For example, if you procced an ATG off of Flamethrower, it would only deal 285% damage because the hit that procced it only did 95% damage. But if you hit an ATG off of Ion Surge, it would deal 2,400% damage because the ability that procced it was much stronger. So yes, you do get more procs with Flamethrower, but the procs you are getting are a lot weaker by comparison. Now, I will acknowledge that Ignition Tanks do help Flamethrower out quite a bit, but when you need an item to make an ability viable past stage 2, that's not a good ability, especially when you're comparing it to Ion Surge, one of the strongest mobility skills in the game. There's just no shot. Moral of the story, don't trust everything you see on the wiki, only trust me because I am always correct and based in reality, and not to brag, but I'll have you know, I take my medication almost every day. To this day, I get comments about this, and this is a hill I will die on. Flamethrower is absolute garbo. All of the defenses I've seen of this ability talk about how much damage it can do, and maybe so, but I think it's irrelevant when the alternative is fucking Ion Surge. By taking Flamethrower, you are opting out of having a mobility skill. It's an unbalanced kit. I don't care how much damage it does. I don't know why this one in particular ruffled so many feathers, but it has, and I even got a death threat for this one. I personally have never understood the hype. The only thing I regret is not putting this at number 1.
There's no wrong way to play Risk of Rain 2, but if you like Flamethrower, you are objectively incorrect. You are not entitled to your own opinion, and I just hope the worst for you and your bloodline. I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you to my members for supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.